G'day everyone and welcome to Zero Shot, the anti-hype AI and business podcast. My name's James Gauci, I'm the CEO of Cadent, and with me as always today is Mr. Llew Jury, the Managing Director of Advancer. Llew, welcome mate.
G'day James, great to be here and hello to all the listeners around the world.
Yeah, so if you've been following us on our journey this year as we kind of go through the trials and tribulations of the AI sector, you might call it, the tools, the models, the changes in kind of search engine marketing, even the robots, Llew, I remember Carl and Carl Jr., Carl the cleaner, your robotic vacuum cleaner. Today, we're kind of moving away from the metal and we're going to touch on something that doesn't quite get enough airtime in our opinion, and that's also probably the number one reason why a lot of AI projects tend to fail, Llew. It's not the tech, it's the people. And Llew, I know you've got a very particular view on this one. Tell me about it.
Yeah, absolutely, James, and really important. We're calling this one the human shift because every organization right now is grappling with AI. They're trying to figure out how to make the most of it. But most importantly, James, they're trying to understand how their people actually use AI and, not just license it, set up a co-pilot, give it a crack and give it a dabble, as we've been talking about, but actually use it in a way that changes how work gets done in their organization. We're seeing this pattern play out before. We've seen it happen with many different iterations of technology. And so we're going to unpack all that today and just sort of discuss the organizations that are actually winning and what are they doing differently. So yeah, let's go.
Great to come off the back of a great chat with Brett Whisker last week, and we were talking so much about the culture of innovation and things as well, which is a perfect platform for this. But before we get into it, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode's brought to you by Prompt Cowboy. And look, guys, here's the thing: when we talk today about people actually adopting AI, one of the biggest blockers we see in organizations, it's that people don't know how to prompt properly, and they open Claude or they open ChatGPT or what have you. They type in something kind of moderately vague. And they wonder why they might get a mediocre result and they just kind of rage quit. They decide that it's not for them. But Prompt Cowboy is designed to fix that. They've got this awesome agentic prompting feature where you can build out your full prompt for your workflow before you put it into the agent of your choosing. So if you want your people to stop avoiding AI and start getting better results from it, go to promptcowboy.ai. It's a genuinely practical tool for teams going through exactly the kind of shift that we're going to be talking about today, Llew.
It is, James, and yeah, thanks to Matt and Henry and the guys at Prompt Cowboy. Straight into it, James. We're looking at news of the week, what's new of the week, tool of the week. We're sort of doing of the week, aren't we? James, what's been your big takeaway this week?
Yeah, my tool of the week is Sam Altman. I think
not tech tool, an actual tool.
I mean, I think it's fair to say at this point that the majority of Sam Altman's credibility is in the dust. And whether it...
Why do you say that?
He's under assault on so many fronts. Like on one front, we've got the lack of capital availability that they have available to them to go and pay for the data centers that they've signed up to with NVIDIA. So they don't have the money for that capital expenditure. And then you've got, the fact that they've just been hemorrhaging their best people for years at this point, leading to some less than stellar releases over the last little while. And then you've got this latest kind of highly emotionally charged furor around the sexual assault allegations of Sam Altman dating back a very long time. And without getting too far into the weeds on it, it's not painting a hot picture of this guy who was a Silicon Valley darling for a very long time, but it feels like the chooks are coming home to roost a bit on his tenure as CEO, and we're starting to realize some of the things that have that led to his initial ousting in the first place. Llew, what's your take on this situation, and what do you think that this means from a business risk perspective, especially?
Yeah, good point, James. I think it's something that everybody needs to be watching in terms of certainly continuity with your models and the APIs that you might be using to connect to. I know that Copilot and Microsoft have already sort of started to move away from OpenAI with Copilot Studio, and you can now select the Anthropic models, the Opus 4.6 and models like that, which is Anthropic, which is now really the biggest competitor to OpenAI, right? And I think there's everybody needs to be well aware of what's going on. There's many different levels of risk. There's capital risk, there's personnel risk, there's key person risk, we call it, if someone leaves and what happens, and then there's model risk and technology risk. So I think it's one to definitely watch, and it leads me to my news of the week, I suppose, and not so much a tool, although I've been using Granola a lot. Granola is just sensational. They just raised, I think, on a valuation of 1.2 billion over the weekend. What I've been watching is Anthropic's run rate, and being a VC from way back, run rate is everything, because actually that's revenue landing in the bank. And if you keep growing at that run rate, then actually by the end of the calendar year, that's what you're going to be worth. And they're actually now ahead of OpenAI. So OpenAI, the original darling of the GPT space that really transformed all of the retail market, if you like, into using AI, are doing about 25 billion run rate per annum. That's OpenAI. And then Anthropic, which makes Claude, is doing about 30 billion run rate at the moment. And that's a very interesting space to watch, because that will attract different types of capital, and it might actually make it a little bit harder for a new frontier model to be released, or a new version of, the version 6, let's call it, of chat and OpenAI. But look, I also want to say, James, you never write off these type of companies. Everybody in the last, 4 to 5 months has moved off towards Claude. You never know. They open and chat might actually bring out something that is completely game changing, and everybody swings back the other way. So who knows?
Yeah, you never can write anybody off, especially when somebody in the background is willing to write a big check, right, Llew?
Absolutely.
Look, let's get straight into the topic of the day, because the models are one thing, and it's a good background for the chat today, because we are now increasingly dependent on these models for performance in AI systems. But as we mature as organizations in our AI adoption journey, accounting for human factors is a really challenging part of any change initiative. And I mean, a lot of people might say, Llew, that it's akin to what we've experienced almost on a 10-year cycle at this point, with digital transformation and Web 2.0, Web 3.0, blockchain. Like, it seems like we go through one of these cycles once in every little while. Is this like enough of a step change to kick off a new language for digital transformation, or are we just going through the same thing all over again?
A bit of both, and how it affects people is really important from an organizational level, James. And I think it's basically a bit of both, in terms of we're on repeat. We're definitely on a cycle. Everything about this world, as we know, and we've been through a few of these, James, is cyclic. And there is these cycles washing through. And from the late 90s with the plugging in of the internet and things like that, through to the cloud, the mobile revolution, the search revolution, and all those sort of things that have happened, we're seeing that, the same sort of thing play out, except with AI, it is different, because it's moving a lot faster, and I suppose the stakes are a lot higher. And so that's really critical, that although we might be watching the same film on repeat, and it might feel like that to you and I, James, I actually think the stakes are higher, and you've got a faster pace of change and transformation coming at you with the advent of social media as well.
100%. And one of the really common mistakes that I've been seeing right now is assuming too much about who should be taking responsibility in an organization when it comes to AI, Llew. Ostensibly it goes to a technical person, but I remember last week you were talking about the fact that, hey, in one of my clients' companies, they've given it to the chief revenue officer and said, go and make some money. Like, is the CIO the right person, or CTO or CDO? What's the profile of the right person? Give me your wisdom.
Well, I think it's depending on the organization, and I think it's how big they are. Of course, if you're a smaller organization, generally it's left up to the CEO or the CFO to sort of really, double down and look at, what return on investment they're getting, because it means so much more at that smaller scale. When you're a lot larger, let's call it 50, 100 mil plus in terms of revenue, you're going to have infrastructure and support. You're going to have C-suite support across your organization. That's where it should actually be customized to your particular environment. But I suppose one thing I've been finding, James, that's been frustrating me a little bit, is that still in 2026, there's three sort of camps that are getting handed the AI strategy. And it's often on the advice of maybe internal board members, or people that just don't get truly what's happening here with this let's call it the fourth industrial revolution and shift that's going on. And that's the CTO, the CIO, and potentially sort of a CFO type person. And those three aren't the people I believe should be rolling this out within the organization. The CFO absolutely needs to be at the table to support the money side so you don't get out of control. And one of my clients, CFO, great guy, he sits there listening and he's parallel to all the conversations and he wants to know all the expenses and where things are going, but he's not, his nose is in, fingers out. And I think that that is a really great way. And I think CEOs also in large organizations need to be noses in, fingers out. I suppose I have a bit of an issue and take umbrage when it gets flicked past to the Microsoft CTO or CIO that have been there for 30 years. And, generally they're fairly stuck in their ways. They get thrown to Seattle every year to go to the Microsoft convention and do a bit of a razzle dazzle and a rah rah and say, come back and go, this AI thing is real. They get handballed or flicked past the AI strategy for the organization. And literally it becomes a risk management nightmare. It blocks and stifles innovation. And I just think that it's a poor way of implementing AI within an organization. Now, James, I think you beg to differ. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd probably go into bat a little bit for some of those people who have been there throughout those various kind of hype cycles in the past. So, is the CIO the right person? It depends, I would say. Depends on the organization,
Absolutely.
Depends on the profile of that person. Not every CIO used to be an IT engineer on the tools. A lot of them were project managers or governance people or analysts or what have you. I think that what we need to acknowledge for a moment is that they have been through that process before, but we also have to agree that the capabilities that got them to where they are not necessarily the capabilities that are going to really make technology sing in this new world of capabilities that we're walking into. Like you mentioned the risk side of the equation, and I see people struggle in real time, kind of classic IT governance and IT systems management people who are so attuned to minimizing risks and minimizing costs. And you start talking about the fact that an IT system can add dramatic amounts of value, and they don't know even how to start that conversation with their CFO. And so it's a bit of a push-pull. Like the CFOs and the CEOs kind of need to lean in so that the CIOs can hear a little bit more of what is now expected. And that's not to say that CIO should change their capability profile overnight, but a responsible CIO will turn around and say, okay, well, I need to hire somebody who thinks this way, who's native to this way of thinking, to come into the organization and own that on my department's behalf. I don't think it's like right person, wrong person. It's like capability profile. Let's bring in the right capabilities for the job so that we can maximize value and minimize risk in the same breath.
Yeah, I agree. And I think CIOs are probably better if you want to put labels on people. I don't like to label people too much, but CIOs are kind of different to CTOs. CTOs generally in my world have come from a development engineering background. They've been more on the tools, building amazing systems, and they're probably a little more rigid in their ways about how they manage change management, how they manage people. They manage it from a technical level, not a human level. And the human side requires different psychological safety, if you want to call it that, and communication strategies and culture strategies and role redesign and all that leadership alignment stuff that you have with workforce planning. So to me, often a CIO is probably, if you want to put labels again, CEO, CIO is someone that would be better. And a second comment there, I've got a client that I went in recently and saw, and the CIO was incredible because he's got he had about 10 people sitting around and they're all Microsoft and they're building on Fabric and they're building on Azure and they're building on all these cool things, right? Which has taken them longer, of course, because it's Microsoft. But he's an old Google, GCP, Google Cloud and BigQuery guy. And we went in and said, which one do you want? Like, do you want the Google or do you want the Azure sort of approach? And he said, look, I love BigQuery and I love GCP. So there's flexibility there. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And it goes into this human shift as well, because your staff and team are going to be watching that. They're going to be seeing these signals of flexibility, innovation, really making sure that what you're putting in is actually going to change and transform the business, right? So, James, you've been inside organizations deploying AI at a technical level. Have you ever had someone come up to you and say, this is no longer an engineering problem, this is a people problem, and handovers and all that? Talk me through some of that sort of side of things that you've seen.
That's a really interesting question because usually I'm the person who sits between the two camps and like I'm usually there because they haven't done that or at least not effectively enough, right? Like
Yeah.
where yeah, kind of like a counselor who's just been hanging around tech people for a long time. But
Maybe
like
that's a role, John. Maybe there's a new role coming, AI counselor.
AI counselor. Well, the amount of phone calls I get, Lou, I might need to change my title. But look, I think when I come into an organization, just over the years, doesn't have to be about AI. It can be about any kind of technological change or expectation shift with, in response to the competitive landscape changing. It's got to be about focusing on why we're focusing on a particular problem. Like, why is this a problem in the first place? Let's define it. Let's measure a baseline. Let's analyze that current state of that system. Let's implement a change and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, let's not do it more. It does feel a little bit like deja vu because these are the exact same lessons that we learned 20 years ago with agile and lean ways of working in technology management and software development, and 10 years ago with the human-centered design revolution. And it feels like it's partly because we're in a bit of the economic cycle where things are really tight right now, and those things seem optional in the moment to a CEO or somebody coming in for change management or whatever, like a big four consultancy. It's very easy to draw red lines through entire departments. It's less easy to understand what that department actually does to add value. And so I think we're seeing a bit of that. But I mean, you've seen in your history, Lou, like you've grown companies, you've sold companies. I mean, Reload was, easily top tier in the Australian marketplace for a very long time. When you look at how Reload adapted through major platform shifts, what was the thing that made the team get across the line? Like, how did you help them be adaptive in their approach in ways that, not every organization is able to achieve?
Well, the first thing, James, we didn't have a CTO or a CIO. We had the CEO, Craig, and myself being managing director, plus general managers around the world that actually gave them a heads up. And we were people first. I suppose a lot of my GMs over the years, I used to say they were way better at coffee catch ups than I was. I was out there selling and representing the brand and speaking and doing all the things that I do. But they were great at those quarterly coffee catch ups. And at those catch ups, there were two core mandates. And this goes right into this AI world. The first one was, how are you going with all the change that's going on in the business and the pressures and the client pressures and the things that you're being expected to learn and things like that? How are you going? And how are you seeing your role? And then the second one was, this is some of the stuff that Lou's got coming, and Craig, they've got this coming, and we may be off this platform and going to this platform in the next 3 to 6 months. So trying to give them a bit of a heads up, trying to sort of engage them. And some of the values at Reload were act like an owner and always take a seat at the table and things like that. So, and they still adopt those now. Reload is still, it's growing and doing really well with Honey Grant. So basically, I think a lot of that DNA was baked into having open conversations and taking on board this human shift and saying, this technology is coming, these platforms are changing. And things we used to say, for example, James, were like, we're on Google doing Google ads, but if Google, trips up and falls, which we know they don't, but, we could always pivot and go elsewhere. And that did happen with different ad platforms and networks and things like that. You just move to the next one to where the audience is and where the eyeballs are. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's digital transformation is very slow moving. People expect it to be fast, but it's actually quite slow. James, what about you, mate? Like, what about seeing companies sort of the news headlines say they're going to get wiped out, but they don't? And how does AI affect that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something that is worth keeping in mind as well. Like, for every Kodak that, died courtesy of the technology that they built for themselves, there's a Deloitte who just appears to go from strength to strength, regardless of what happens. Like, digital transformation 10 to 20 years ago didn't kill everyone. And a lot of those organizations that really took a step back appear to have thrived somehow. Does that say more? What is that? What is the signal in that noise? Because that seems counterintuitive, especially in the ways that, especially the hype merchants will like it runs counter to something that a hype merchant might say about a revolutionary technology. Um, yeah, is there
Don't get me
survivorship
started.
bias? I don't know. I'm just throwing a stone here, Lou. What do you reckon?
Look, don't get me started about the hype merchants. Like I've been going on recently about the yell and sell that is going on with the TikTokers and the Instagram and all the algorithms that pollute even LinkedIn. LinkedIn's become a bit of junk mail, hasn't it? With your feed, your business feed. But I think I've seen these cycles happen before. They affect people though. Again, coming back to the human side, this yell and sell about you're going to lose your job. AI is replacing this many Atlassian. News headlines here. What it is all about eyeballs. It's all about eyeballs and, basically getting you to click through. So over the years, that's called clickbait, if you want a word for it. And that yell and sell from the TikTokers and the influencers, if you could call them that, is something that's been around, and I've seen cycles of this. Tony Robbins, for example, James, is now an AI expert. Now, Tony Robbins has reinvented himself 3 times out of his Florida mansion. The first part, 25 years ago, he was a business coach. About 10 years ago, he was a digital marketing expert, an SEOer, and now he's an AI expert. And they do that every 3 years. And I'm saying that's kind of like what I've done, but I've actually then built companies and people to go on the journey around that. What these guys do is they'll get you to a free seminar. Down the back, they've got a CD-ROM, or DVD, CD in the 2000s, DVD in the 20s, and now a cloud-based login amazing system. And they'll sell you a $10,000 package on how to get AI enabled in your small business. And that stuff I call fly by night. I've seen it happen in 3 iterations. They come in, they burn a market, that market and those people might get a little bit disenfranchised. And it's about survival of the companies that are actually going to be there to support them and help them, like you with Cadent, James, and like Advancer and what we're doing. So I have a bit of a bone to pick with this because I've seen it happen, again and again, and it's being amplified by social media and things like that.
That kind of is a nice little link to this next topic that we've got, which is kind of this accountability gap, it seems, that's growing. And I can't imagine Tony Robbins is going to take a ton of accountability when he gets refund requests for his $10,000 DVD. But like a lot of people genuinely believe that AI is coming for their job and it's a huge generational shift that we're going to have to get across. That isn't always wrong. Like we've talked about on the podcast before, that it's not so much that it isn't going to impact people's employment. It's just a question of how and to what extent. And that's not going to be uniform across the economy kind of thing. But when we're thinking about that, that raises uncertainty, that raises fear, these kinds of really human emotions and insights. And we're feeling this for a reason, it seems, Lou. And we've talked in the past about business's version of fear being risk, and that risks can be managed, and kind of an organizational approach to risk is essentially an organizational approach to being mindful about the problems that you have in the moment and being reasonable about what resources you can apportion to solving those kinds of problems. Does that resonate with what you've been seeing out there in the market? Because I get the sense that because of those fly-by-nighters, there is a disproportionate amount of fear because people are genuinely getting burned.
Yeah, they're getting burnt in a number of areas. And I think there's, the yell and sell, I call it, which is, the young person on there, good on them for, giving it a crack and getting out there and trying to sell some AI automation workflow, whatever you want to call it. A $500 solution will completely transform your real estate business or your dentist or whatever it might be. That's cool. And I'm all about bringing young people on the journey and supporting them. But when there's fear and it's about careers and jobs, and next month you're going to lose your job, and next week you're going to be like Atlassian or, the next company that's, removing 30,000 people like Oracle and things like that, Amazon, because the robots are here and the robots are coming. That heightened sense of fear is actually what some politicians from the US play on as well, James. And they keep you at that state of alert. And you can't actually then concentrate on other things. You are literally beholden to, that sort of state that really doesn't allow you to have clarity. And that fear is not good. And you just go in a bit of a downward spiral. There's a thing called AI anxiety that Forbes magazine was talking about a year ago, which resonated with me because there is people out there right now in many different, middle management layers, in staff, team leader roles, things like that, that kind of know that some of the work they do may be transformed very quickly. What we don't know is how quickly that's happening, whether the technology is actually right now. I mean, Claude in the browser is awesome, but could it replace, a whole role of someone that is doing many different things, not just, simple tasks? So, look, I think the technology is definitely here and it's coming, and the AGI thing is a big one to talk about. But I think fear and being rational is really, really important, and calming the farm a bit. I think what we need to do is actually sort of give the message across that, Monday morning, is everything going to change? The likelihood is no. James, what about you? Like you're in really technically complex worlds, high stake organizations. You've just gone on a tour with the financial planners. What have you been seeing and hearing? Are the engineers pushing back? Are the financiers pushing back? And, what do you do in your business, when you're talking to people about rather than just bulldozing through?
Look, I think you have to meet people. Like it's a bit of a truism, but you have to meet people where they're at. In compliance heavy industries, the cost of a bad outcome is known, and it's usually counted in the many thousands of dollars to millions of dollars, and or injury and or loss of life. And when you start talking in those terms, you intuitively, as a person, become quite risk averse at the individual level. And the anti pattern that I see is that individual level of risk aversion, because you don't want bad things to happen, turns into a bit of a mob mentality where any kind of risk is rejected. And when we're hoping to govern risk, not like the hope is not a strategy when you're hoping to govern risk. The you have to be forensic. You have to understand the nature of the risk, the quality of the risk, the likelihood of the scenario actually happening, the likely cost of that scenario taking place. And this isn't just costs in terms of financial costs. It can be costs in terms of reputation, which has downstream effects. It can be in costs in terms of availability of your service or availability to information. It has kind of system-wide effects that are not just direct financial costs that need to be considered in that process. And once you've got a really good definition of the nature of that risk and the preconditions that lead to the manifestation of that risk or that threat actually coming to bear, then you can be really clever about controlling for it, either accepting it or mitigating it or transferring it, getting insurance for that. That's what a well-informed and mature governor of not just AI, but almost any system, human or otherwise, in a scenario might do. The things that people tell me about, the things that are top of mind for most people are privacy risks. And I get that. And I agree with that. That is kind of definitely in the top 5 for me. But I think the risk of over-reliance and the risk of not properly measuring the AI that's operating in your organization, those are probably bigger risks for me.
Yeah, really good points, James. And something else I want to put on the table that I think a lot of organizations are probably using change management as an excuse for slow adoption. Back to your point about the technology side, often they're sort of saying, we're managing change carefully, we're going slowly. And what often this might mean is that nothing's really happening. And the report that goes up to the board sort of says, yes, we're doing AI and we're doing change. And, at some point though, is careful change management a polite way of saying we're not actually doing anything? So you've got to be careful with everything you just said and also the human side, because your staff, as I said before, your staff see that. They see that, things aren't happening and transforming, and we're maybe going back to our old ways instead of actually adopting AI in the organization. So,
I think
yeah,
there's a
very
bit of
interesting.
change fatigue, maybe,
Change fatigue.
that's there, and combine that with the real fears, it will lead to slow progress. And the ones that gain the competitive edge are going to be the ones that connect the grassroots desire for the efficiencies within their job with the kind of top-down desire for better productivity and so on, which everybody seems to be crying for throughout the economy at the moment.
I think from chaos to competitive edge is definitely where we're heading. We're heading. I think there's been a bit of chaos, and I think this whole yell and sell thing that I was talking about, and the fatigue. It feels like last year was a lot of fatigue in 2025 with a lot of models and a lot of GPTs and a lot of stuff thrown at everybody and a lot of reactiveness from the CEO all the way through the organization. So
Yeah.
I think talking about workforce design now and doing that before tool selection is probably one of the greatest things that actually organizations need to take away. And, it's not which AI tool should we buy. It's what does the team's work, what work are they doing, and what does it look like? And what processes and routines can we remove before we actually then adopt the tech? And what capabilities do people need in the future to be able to do that? So role redesign is really important, and then the tooling follows, right, James?
Yeah, it's kind of back to the future for me. This is all stuff that, because my trade, so to speak, is project management and product management, and I was an agilist and things like that before taking on leadership roles and things, and we were preaching this from the rooftops, like we need to adapt or we are going to die, and change is the only constant, and let's work in time boxes and make sure our goals are really nicely defined so that we can chase them as hard as we can, and nice tight feedback loops so that we can pivot nice and quickly in case the environment changes. Like, these are all things that we've been saying for a long time, and I think that we genuinely had throughout the economy for a certain amount of time. But maybe there was a bit of a false sense of security because of the abundance in the economy at that time, where I was like, yeah, we feel okay to take these kinds of risks, and we feel okay that failure is an option because it genuinely is. It's just part of our risk appetite. But what I've learned since then is that not even the time-honored, battle-tested standard governance frameworks are getting a look in today's economy, in many organizations, especially smaller ones. And you say the words international standard to an organization of less than 200 people, and they're like, yeah, we don't have time or money for that right now. And that makes me think that there might be room for some more streamlined kind of approaches to these kinds of things, Llew. I know that you mentioned earlier in the podcast your approach to that, which is the human shift framework. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and walk me through what genuine engagement actually looks like, because if we can understand the difference between kind of buying a training program or a Coursera course or something like that and actually doing the work of workforce transition, that's a good thing. So what does it actually take when you guys go into a small or medium business?
I think, James, the big thing is making sure that the workforce is top of mind and making sure that you do a bit of an impact assessment first. You actually go in and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And before I answer what we're doing with the human shift, back to your point about leadership first and making sure that all the organization is coming along with the journey and not sort of everything you were saying about the modern way of approaching it from what you're saying. A really hot tip there for businesses is I was in a training course a couple of Wednesdays ago for 13 executives, and the CEO was leading the way. He was in the corner, but he was leading the way from from having a crack and being prepared to ask questions and say, I don't understand how to do this. Can you come around here? So we went around and we helped him, and then someone else said, I don't understand as well. So away we went. Now, this is the C-suite. These are GMs from around the world, and it was refreshing for 4 hours to run that half-day AI training session and workshops with them, because we're all felt like we're on the same level. And I think that's a critical thing. When you go in with something like the human shift, you basically are not just going into completely change and transform straight away. You're going to listen, watch, and time and motion studies have come back in favor, James. Time and motion is sort of generally out of hospitals and those sort of places where you'll stand there with a clipboard and watch the nurses and watch the doctors and see how long the doctor takes to do that, and then try and get better medicine to people quicker and all those sort of things, right? So they're called time and motion studies. They're actually making a resurgence with the world of AI because we're doing so much process reengineering and therefore workforce reengineering and impact. So you always start with that. You do look at the skills mapping piece. You make sure that you actually have the capacity and capability in your existing team to be able to implement this in the future. You also do some leadership stuff as well. Make sure that the change management piece with the leaders, like a bit like that training session, you might start with them to actually bring them aside as one of the, a parallel sprint in your Gantt chart to actually sort of say, look, let's go and do something in private to sort of bring you on the journey. And then the rubber hits the road with the AI enablement. And that's where you roll out your AI strategy program. But what you can hear, James, is you do all these things before. And you basically are talking about the humans here. So you do it in a way that basically equips people and puts it in the hands of people rather than just going in with, as we were saying, the technology and the AI tools.
Mm. That it's a new age of solutioneering, to use a jargon term that we use in engineering circles, where it's easy to jump towards the recommendation of a tool or a technique or what have you, but if you don't genuinely test the waters for adoption, you're dead on arrival. And I think it's something that
Well, it's likewise. I think with that, it's likewise with the signals of workforce change programs, and you would have seen those done, and you would have been part of those when you came in. So, talk us through what you've seen where people got that right and maybe got that wrong. And
Mm,
have you been in there for longer because they got it wrong, or do you sort of get put on pause and go, look, we need to sort our own things out, and then we
yeah.
need to bring you back in?
I mean, imagine being parachuted into a 2-year system development and realize that none of the stakeholder engagement had been done. Like that's
Wow.
literally a situation that I've been in an organization of many hundreds of people, and with, pretty high risk circumstances and high bar for compliance and security and things like that. And it wasn't because people had kind of a negative attitude towards it. It's just they didn't have the capabilities there. And I think that what you said about mapping skills for people and capabilities that are needed in the organization to the actual strategic outcomes that the organization wants to achieve, that becomes a really, really important part of that framework. Yeah, maybe if somebody's listening to this and they're a department head or a GM or a CEO, if they recognize their organization in this conversation, what's one thing that they should be doing on Monday morning, Lou?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you that, because I think they need to get the right advisory, whether it's internal or external. But I was going to ask you because you've seen a lot of these sort of AI reskilling programs. You've seen a lot, as you said, the one without the stakeholder analysis and things like that. What would be like one that's been very successful for you, James, that worked really well, and now they're a client of yours, and you're just rolling through that implementation program?
Well, that exact situation was a great example of how to kind of get it back on track, because the first thing that we did was an end-to-end business process map for the organization, interviewed kind of executive all the way down to frontline staff, actually getting a lay of the land, so that we could identify where the bottlenecks were, because something that we all knew was that everybody was overworked. Uh, Attrition was a huge issue, even though the dedication of all of those people in that circumstance was very, very high. So when we were able to boil it down to functional issues and not kind of people issues, when we could identify the problems in the process that were making it problematic for people, and then use that to inform the redesign of the processes, of the tools, of the technology, of the information engineering and the data, that leads to dramatically better circumstances for everyone. Who knew that when you go and ask the people who run the process whether or not it's any good, that they would give you actually insightful answers? Like it seems intuitive when you say it out loud, but it happens less in practice than you might think. But it is genuinely the keys to success.
It's super important, isn't it? And yeah, as we wrap up, I suppose let's just go through the takeaways from today's awesome session, James. And I think for me, my key takeaway has been truly about what we talk about at Advancer, which is people first AI. Making sure that the people are there in the remit, in the stakeholder engagement. They're actually the ones that you're doing this for, and they're engaged to come along. The other thing we probably haven't talked about much is one of my clients is very good at redeployment, and they have seen this coming, and for about 12 months have had a redeployment plan that if we put something into an area like a call center, people can be redeployed within the organization into varying roles, and there's not too much AI anxiety. So, I think doing workforce impact assessments, understanding the roles and the capabilities that are in your organization, and those roles that are going to shift and move, and when are they going to change, and then design the transition around that, design the tools around that has been my key takeaway. And yeah, as I said, at Advancer, we don't wait for the acute pain. We make sure we get in front of it, and we plan ahead under the human shift. So, James, what about you, mate? What's been your key takeaway today?
I think we're incurring, as a society, an absolute ton of not technical debt, but user experience and human-centered design debt. And in chasing too aggressively efficiencies in our organization, maybe we're forgetting that we need to bring people on the journey. And we may also be forgetting that people have gotten us to where we are. We should respect that. We have to respect that, because just to remind us all, we're people as well.
It's good, mate. And yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And yeah, making sure that it's people first. So look, it's been an awesome episode. We're going to close out today and just to quickly talk about the next episode, and we're going to zoom out even more. We did Brett last week, which was amazing, and then we've talked about people and change today, and we're going to go one level out on this thematic that we've been talking about, which is about governance and anti-patterns and how to avoid them, and also a little bit of risk management in there as well, because as AI gets embedded into the business decision making and accountability and who's up for it when it goes wrong, and it's actually really there, and there's a lot of things to unpack with that. So going to be really interesting.
And next week, I'd love to talk about AI security, cyber threats as well in that package, like the really pointy end of when you fail to account for certain circumstances in your risk management and planning, how it can go wrong in a major way and in different ways than we're used to as well. So yeah, really keen to get across that with you, Llew. And look, thanks again to the team at Prompt Cowboy. If today's session made you think about how to actually get your team using AI properly, check out their agentic prompting feature. It's very cool. It's a practical starting point that a lot of organizations are missing. So trot on over on your little horsey to Prompt Cowboy. Hi, yeehaw.
Yeehaw. Awesome.
Well, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks for joining Zero Shot. We're doing this for you, the people who are building the AI future, the skeptics of the AI future, the business strategists who are actually moving the needle in their businesses and their organizations. But we don't just want to talk at you. Find us in your nearest comments section. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. Find us on LinkedIn. Find us on TikTok. Find us on Instagram. Yanni Loretta, our producer, is absolutely tearing apart the social media landscape to try and find you, our audience. So if you would like to hear us unpack or demystify something and remove all of the hype and give you our level take on what's actually going on, please definitely find us in those comment sections. We read every single one. So Llew, did I miss any of those channels, or were there ones today?
I think all the socials, all good. Search James Gauci and Llew Jury on LinkedIn, and I will be sure to help you with anything you need from your AI journey. But it's been awesome. Yeah. Thanks a lot to everybody, and thanks to James.
Thanks very much, Llew. Thanks, Yanni Loretta, our producer, and thank you to our audience. Stay sharp, stay sovereign, and we'll see you in the next episode.